Welcome to Watchtower History.
What we found next is reminiscent of a governing body member like Ray Franz questioning one of the doctrinal foundations of the modern theology of Watchtower. And this was back in the 1920s.
So there's a letter here, and these are later than some of the other letters that we had before.
1924.
Yeah, this one's 1924. The earlier ones were 1919 and 1920. So this one's a little bit later, and it's going to tell us a little bit more about what's going on in Fischer's life and Watchtower as we're going through. And remember, a couple of years previous to this, Fischer resigns as editor. Why did he resign? We had some speculation on that. We're going to get a little more detail on that.
Now, Jeff, for authenticity's sake, where did these two letters come from?
Again, this is all part of that Fischer correspondence that was written to Fischer and a lot of letters from Fischer. Unfortunately, I'm unable to reveal my sources, but all of these letters are with his valid signature. They're all together. They're all dated in the right period. And they mention things in Fischer's personal life that we're getting into that really explains what's going on between Fischer and Rutherford.
So a short translation is a Jehovah Witness, a current Jehovah Witness, who's supplying this stuff, doesn't want to be made known, but whose family had been around the Watchtower for quite a few years. And let me add this here too, Jeff. A lot of people don't realize, because of the Watchtower mentality and the influence that they have, they make it seem like all these Bible students from years ago, they all just disappeared and whatnot. A lot of those old Bible students and old Jehovah's Witnesses saved these letters. They were part of their history and they took pride in it. I remember one of my grandmother's friends back when I was a boy, was in her 80s. She saved every Watchtower she ever got, her whole attic, and that was a Victorian home, so you could store it. Her whole attic was original copies of the Watchtowers, and every book that came out, every pamphlet. And it's sad when she passed on, I don't know where it all went. They probably just got rid of it and whatnot. But that she had one heck of a collection. I remember she brought me up there one time, and you're like a kid in a candy store seeing all this stuff in boxes and files, and I didn't realize what it was at the time, but it was quite a library, just to say that.
I would have been up there for hours just digging to see what I could find. Those are the barn finds that I kind of like,
She had the old Watchtower from prior to Rutherford, so she had all that stuff.
So in this first letter, Gordon Thorne is writing a letter to Fischer. He says something interesting here. He says, "When the finished mystery came out, I rejoiced greatly in the light shed on Revelation and Ezekiel. Now that the Lord has permitted me to see greater light in his word, I would like others to rejoice with me in this light, hoping that your part interpretation of Ezekiel will not hinder you from proving the enclosed. I am hearing that your eyes have been opened to see some of the abominations of the truth sects." So he's saying that there's something going on, and Fischer's eyes have been opened to some of what's happening in Watchtower.
Mm-hmm.
What that is, we'll get to that in just a moment.
And again, remember, we've said from the very beginning, we're taking our discussions in an organized order. So we're showing documentation as we get into discussion. Again, I know I've repeated this before, but here's why. This is a good example of why we're showing this stuff and discussing it. It will come in handy in the future.
And what this Gordon Thorne is doing, and I've seen others make similar claims. Penton does similarly in his book, The Apocalypse Delayed. He's comparing Watchtower to the Catholic Church, to papacy, and saying, hey, the way Rutherford's structuring this, or the way Rutherford's creating this new movement out of the old one, is basically making a new apostolic succession. And he's saying that basically they have the authority that's continued from the head of Watchtower just basically because they control Watchtower. Just because a new governing body member comes in, that apostolic succession that they have shows that they are still the chosen ones, and that whatever new thing that they come up with must be the new light from Jehovah.
Infallibility.
Basically, yeah. So he says the counterpart of this is in the claim that God would not allow the Watchtower, his representative on earth, to go wrong in any important matter of doctrine or work. They're not perfect, they're not infallible, but they can't be wrong.
The mouthpiece of God, but we're not claiming to be. It doesn't add up.
In his point number 5, the great work, he says the commission of the Watchtower system is also claimed to be the preparation of the world for the kingdom. Though God will judge the system, yet I believe he will overrule the message as a witness and as a blessing for many. It is one of the great signs and wonders through which many have been deceived with idol worship, holding another head than that of Christ Jesus.
In other words, they did not know. They did not understand. You can't punish them for not understanding.
Well, he's saying it's fitting that the Apostle Paul should speak of this class in his letter to the Laodicean church, and that's Colossians. And remember, the letter to Colossians was to be shared with the Laodicean church, and the letter to Laodicea was to be shared with the Colossian church. Realizing that as Bible students, that he sends angels and messengers. So he's basically saying, hey, the whole meaning of the work has changed. They've changed the whole perspective of the worldwide. It became a worldwide preaching campaign out of what it was. The whole goal of it was completely different. What that is another discussion for another time. We'll talk about that in the future.
And basically, if you refer back to, I don't remember which number it was in the Faith and Action discussion, and this shows basically how the Watchtower in Faith and Action, I don't remember which video we did, but how George Storr's article, how they quoted it, all out of context. It was not meant to be a great worldwide preaching work. And here, you're seeing people not agreeing with what they're doing. They were always talking about a little flock, not a great company on earth, let alone the Bible Revelation saying it's in heaven.
Another discussion for another time. Another letter from Thorne. This is a couple weeks later. July 20th, 1924. And he adds a little bit more to the story. He's pointing to a letter that Fischer wrote to him, and he's responding to it. At the bottom of the letter, he says, in your letter, you asked for my thought on the sheep and goats parable. My heart goes out to you in this matter as I realize your present trial, made doubly severe by your prominence in the truth. Possibly I can comfort you with the comfort that I have been comforted with. When the division came, I went with the Watchtower group, but about 5 years ago, I began to realize that I was becoming sectarian and that I was not showing my love for those who were also begotten of the Spirit, although not meeting with us. In seeking to love all the brethren, I soon found myself in more or less of a wilderness condition, being counted as a lost sheep by the Watchtower brethren and not wholly received by the other groups, because I still met and studied with those whom they thought to be in error. My only hope and trust, therefore, was in the Lord, and I can humbly say that he has greatly enlightened me in the deep things of God and in the truths and errors as they became manifest among these different groups of the Lord's people. So what then is the strong delusion and the great signs and wonders that was to deceive all but the very elect? The answer is that God, in trying and judging those in the present truth with the same systems of error by which the true church has been tried all down the age, the delusions may vary among the different groups of Bible students, but the results are the same in all. These errors, from a small beginning, have grown so strong that to question them is to cut oneself off from the full fellowship of those who swallow them without questioning. What you are probably most interested in is the Watchtower group. The fact that they are now putting forth that which is clearly seen to be an error, even by those in the systems, shows that this period of delusion is about men, and the results of this delusion among the individual members of the Bible students are beginning to be manifested both in the sight of God and in their own sight. The results of this manifestation seem to be about as follows. There are those who put their trust in these organizations and will continue to swallow all that's given them. Those who see the truth but lack the full development of love soon become incensed with their brethren who differ with them, and those who lose faith in God because they have lost confidence in their leaders.
Now let's stop here 1 second, Jeff. Let's first of all going back. Where did all this letters, division, sects, all originate from? Rutherford.
Well, yeah.
Rutherford. Now you look at it in the faith and action view, like they were all against him. Well, he took over the corporation. We showed that. He took over doctrines, the editorial committee, and all this, caused everybody to split and go their own separate way. That doesn't mean he had the truth because he took over a corporation. And when you really look at letters like that, from the outside perspective, here's the Bible student saying, wait, we don't want what he's creating. Now look, 100 years later, you talk with the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, they're literally saying everything in these letters that they were accusing Rutherford 100 years ago of doing, creating apostolistic successions and all that kind of stuff. So really, the atmosphere was set by Rutherford, and 100 years later, it hasn't changed. This letter could have been written by an ex-Jehovah Witness. But what goes to show is that in the separation, those who followed, some left and said, whoa, this is wrong. But in that separation, it's not Rutherford had this great truth that he developed and became light. And people were saying, no, the Bible doesn't say that. No, he's applying this to himself. So this is a great letter. I think these two letters to show a snapshot of what the other side of faith and action was thinking. They weren't thinking what faith and action is saying they were saying.
It's so fascinating. And as we said earlier, look at the timing of this. Mm-hmm. Look at when Fischer is resigned as editor, or pushed out, as the other letter by Fischer stated, because he disagreed with the editorial decisions. And Rutherford, of course, had 2 votes, and they needed 5, or they would hold off on our article. So he made it just so that they needed 4, so Fischer's vote didn't count. So what was happening around this time period? Rutherford said himself that the trouble between him and Fischer started in 22. The sheep and the goats article that's being questioned here is in 23. It's between that Fischer is removed as editor.
And here's a guy who looks like, you know what, I kind of bought into all this at first, but now stepping back and thinking and watching where it's going, I'm wrong. He's saying he's wrong. It's like a lot who probably thought Hitler meant well for Germany. And in the beginning, it probably sounded good. Yes, we want to make Germany a great nation again, work, everything. But then all of a sudden, he's starting to go down this path, and everybody's like, well, wait, this is not what we signed up for, and stepping back. That looks like the letter, what I'm gathering out of there, that's regret. I'm seeing I regret being deceived even. I'll go as far as saying being deceived.
And this is a letter that is in response to Fischer's question. Mm-hmm. Fischer's asking him his opinion about that particular sheep and goats article. So based on the timing we said earlier, our guess is that this related to the sheep and goats article, this problem between him and Rutherford, and all the other things Rutherford was doing, the burlesque, and going to the Pope for the divorces, right? Yeah. So, here we have very clear, definitive is this article. All right. We have a letter from Fischer now discussing this further. All right.
Well,
so now
one last thing, Jeff, before we go to the next letter, I can't help but laugh how they're comparing it to the Catholic Church. And based on just the reminder of the Pope absolving a marriage, they went. So literally, they did make Rutherford. He became a Babylon the Great right there when you're asking the Pope for a divorce.
They were trying to distance themselves from Christendom, and yet what they're doing is becoming Christendom. They're doing exactly the same Christendom is doing, you know, especially the disfellowshipping thing. So here is the letter Fischer wrote to Thorne. Fischer's letter here is dated July 14th, 1924. Thorne's letter is dated July 20th. So this is a week before. I don't know why you just didn't email him. Would have been a lot faster, but you know, there you have it. First of all, in this letter, this is probably why the correspondence was saved. A lot of this, because it's all questions about Ezekiel's temple. And this is something Fischer is still researching. He's still gathering notes. And as we showed previously, a lot of those notes for Ezekiel's temple were never published. They happened to just be until now, basically. So in this letter, Fischer says, I have gone carefully over your contribution to this subject and am going to preserve it for help on a fuller understanding of the matter. So even Fischer is saying, who wrote the finished mystery, don't know enough about the subject. We need to research it further. When I went over Ezekiel, I saw the possibility of the chapter dates yielding something valuable in present-day Bible chronology, but was unable to make anything out of it, except in the first chapter, where the age of Brother Russell is indicated. I feel that there's much to learn about the other several dates and trust that at some time it may be fully and exactly understood. Here is the main point of the letter. I am not one that thinks that all the light is held by the society and its publications. Well, first of all, he was on the editorial committee. That would have been like the precursor to the governing body, right? So he says specifically, I don't think we have all the light. On the Tower Board of Editors, it was my routine duty to pass on proposed articles as to their truth or error. When the new second death doctrine in the sheep and goat article was published, I objected to it as error. But the error has been intensified in further articles. So here we have directly, specifically, Fischer stating he objected to the sheep and goats article. This was the main contention between the two men. And he says, now the new doctrine is that the Pharisees have already gone into second death. I am quite unable to make this agree with Jesus' words to the effect that, Matthew 21:31, the publicans shall go into the kingdom before you. I guess he's interpreting it as, if the publicans are going to be there, so are you. Luke 13:35, you shall not see me henceforth until you shall say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. So you would see it, I guess, is how they're interpreting it. Luke 13:28, you shall see Abraham in the kingdom. Matthew 10:15, 11:22, 24. It's going to be more tolerable for Sodom, etc., in the day of judgment than for you. And certain parts of Romans 11. He continues the letter. The simple question I ask myself, and which cannot be answered without denying the words of Jesus Christ, is how can it be true that the Pharisees have gone into second death if they're to be alive in the kingdom? No one thus has answered this at all, except for the suggestion that there were two classes of Pharisees, the more evil and the more moral, such as Gamaliel. I'm obliged to reject this as also as error because not implied in the context or the sense. So he's questioning things that's coming out of Watchtower. He's saying, yeah, we didn't have all the truth. I didn't think we ever had all the truth. We're trying to figure stuff out. But the way that Rutherford was doing it was saying, we've got all the light. We're the chosen ones. We're the only one God is using. And basically got to the point where you have to believe what we're saying or you're out of here.
And he's using the Bible in reference specifically to the Pharisees. Jesus never said, woe to you, some of you scribes. He said all of them. Woe to you included all of them. So that confirms this letter right here and his way of thinking in explanation of that. This is what changed it all.
Yeah, this is basically, as you said, this is what changed it all. Fischer died. Right. And so here's the telegram that's written and sent. And it says, George H. Fischer, Bible teacher and author, son of the late Reverend George Fischer, died at his office here Friday evening, July 30th. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us. And this is from Frank Woodage Jr. Notice when you look at the death notice as published in the Enterprise, Frank Woodage Jr. is the one who gives a little description about Fischer's life. And remember, Fischer's on the outs at this time in Watchtower because he's already separated. Rutherford and them are, already avoiding him. A year later, 1927, they republish The Finished Mystery 1 year later, and they leave out the Ezekiel portion of the book.
We were laughing earlier about how Fischer's death, changed everything, but literally it did. And if you look at the previous letter from Thorne that we were talking about, coming back, people coming to their senses, he was a respected figure in the Bible student movement that had he stayed alive, very likely a lot less people might have continued following Rutherford. So his death, to some extent, literally empowered or allowed Rutherford to strengthen his new religion.
Yeah, basically. And think about this. If Fischer had been successful in having a church trial because of what Rutherford was doing, he had 2 or 3 witnesses, and Rutherford was taken out of there, maybe they would have corrected some of these things. Mm-hmm. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten the control over people's lives that they did, and maybe there wouldn't be as many damaged people coming out of Watchtower as there are today, mm-hmm. because of the controls that Rutherford was putting into the organization. This was the beginning of it. And that whole entire judgmental attitude started right there with him.
But then taking it one step further, the same people that went to Rutherford for absolution of their marriages, what would they have done with Fischer and the other 2 witnesses? Would they even listen, or would they declared it? Nope, this is the Pope, you can't accuse him, and just brushed it under the rug. I never saw Al Jolson. Is there other discussion? So it's hard to say. But in a perfect world, had he done and people followed the right chain of command, hey, Rutherford should not have been. Here's the 2 witnesses plus Fischer. Here's saying he was doing this, behaving this way. We've got to stop this. And like you said, in the perfect world, it would have changed the history of Watchtower Bible and Tract Society as we know it today.
But even further, this is 26, 27 now. By the time you get to 29 and 30, what's Rutherford doing? He's still getting accusations against him because people are seeing what's going on. So what he does is go into Romans 13, reinterprets the higher authorities as those taking the lead in the organization and the elders, and basically says, unless you have 2 or 3 witnesses, don't take an accusation against an elder. And, that's gossip and hearsay. Just stay out of gossip and hearsay. We don't want to hear it. He's trying to give himself a free get out of jail card by changing the interpretation.
You can't even listen to anyone saying anything bad about him anymore.
And where did that 2 witness rule take it? How has Watchtower taken that to the extreme today? We've discussed
their lawsuits with child molestation. It is. This point in the history of Watchtower changed
everything. And so beyond that, so we have a discussion on the 2 witness rule. If you haven't seen that, we'll go into a little more detail on that there. But the next step that Rutherford did was getting rid of the editors and claiming that was the will of Jehovah to get rid of the editors. And he said that they didn't want...
Remember, he printed, it was very plainly obvious that Jehovah's direction was in that. Literally printed that in the Watchtower.
And, what was he talking about? Well, there's this article in 1925, and we're going to discuss that in our history of disfellowshipping doctrine, because that's really a part of that story. There's an article in 1925 that Rutherford publishes called The New Nation. And he reinterprets Revelation 12. Again, how did Rutherford interpret everything? It's all about me. I'm the chosen one. And so if therefore this Revelation 12 is all about us and Watchtower right now, then that means Satan's cast out of heaven. Well, when would he have been cast out of heaven? When there was a war. So it must have been 1914. That's the logic behind where he's going. But the editors objected to the article. He published it anyway. What did he do with the editors? He just got rid of them. And basically, in a couple articles, says Satan tried to prevent us from publishing the article. He's calling his own editors Satan. Weren't they part of the governing body?
Again, a decade later.
Yep. So we have an upcoming discussion on the history of the disfellowship doctrine. You'll be very, very interested.
And remember this article that Jeff just mentioned, Birth of a Nation, that you're going to see that again, and you're going to see how important that ties into the Watchtower completely.
And we have a whole nother discussion on just that itself and where that was taking it. So there's some very interesting things coming up on the channel. Stay tuned with us.
Just because somebody won the battle in all this does not make everything being told correct. If in the United States, for instance, if the United States lost the American Revolution, George Washington would have been a traitor. Instead, because the United States won, history is written with how great it was, the oppression from England and all this. Just because Rutherford won the battle in gaining control of the Watchtower Society, like we're going to show in future discussions and our thing in discussion with Root, it doesn't change what the facts really are. And that's what needs to be investigated. And like the Bereans, prove to yourself, because that could change your viewpoint on the whole religion itself.
And Watchtower in that recent article encouraged us to fact check the modern history of Watchtower. How do you fact check something? Do you just read Watchtower's version of the story? Or do you try and find all the information that you can get from personal correspondence like we have here, or the splinter groups? Gather all the information that you can and build your case, build the evidence, and see where does the evidence lead you by putting all the evidence together one spot. And that's what we're trying to do here on the Watchtower History Channel. Is take this puzzle piece and this puzzle piece and this puzzle piece and show how the puzzle fits together and how it really answers and describes how the modern Watchtower came to be.
And thank you for everybody's encouragement and confidence and well wishes for us doing this.
Again, Paul, another very interesting discussion about Fischer, to seeing how these ideas developed over time. We saw what people thought about Fischer and his integrity, and that he had the integrity in seeing what Rutherford was doing and trying to put a stop to it. Didn't work out how he had hoped. And even though he dared to disfellowship Rutherford, to have a church trial to accomplish that, the timing of his death prevented that, and the others decided not to go ahead with the church trial. But we haven't done a discussion where we've returned to a discussion like this before, so this was interesting. And thank you, Paul. This has been another very fascinating discussion.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you again, Paul. This has been a very fascinating discussion. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. Get a whole story, not just from the Watchtower's perspective, but from all the various splinter groups. What were they saying? So until next time, keep reading.